Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, Part 1. I grew up in South Africa during apartheid, which was awkward because I was raised in a mixed family, with me being the mixed one in the family. My mother, Patricia Numbuyiselo Noah, is black. My father, Robert, is white. During apartheid, one of the worst crimes you could commit was having sexual relations with a person of another race. Needless to say, my parents committed that crime. Okay, so I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to highlight this part and I'm going to write a comment. I want you to answer this question in the comment box. What do you think the story will be about? So that's the question I have for you guys. You're going to highlight this sentence and you're going to answer this question. What do you think this story will be about? So just make a quick prediction. It doesn't have to be lengthy, maybe 2 to 3 sentences long. And then once you're done, please click comment. Okay. In any society built on institutionalized racism, race mixing doesn't merely challenge the system as unjust. It reveals the system as unsustainable and incoherent. Race mixing proves that races can mix, and in a lot of cases, want to mix. Because a mixed person embodies that rebuke to the logic of the system, race mixing becomes a crime worse than treason. In South Africa, mixed people came to be classified as their own separate group, neither black nor white, but what we call colored. Colored people, black people, white people, and Indian people were forced to register their race with the government. Based on those classifications, millions of people were uprooted and relocated, and eventually they were segregated. The government went to insane lengths to try to enforce these new laws. The penalty for breaking them was 5 years in prison. There were whole police squads whose only job was to go around peeking through windows, clearly an assignment for only the finest law enforcement officers. And if an interracial couple got caught, God help them. The police would kick down the door, drag the people out, beat them, and arrest them. If you ask my mother whether she ever considered the ramifications of having a mixed child under apartheid, she will say no. She wanted to do something, figured out a way to do it, and then she did it. She had a level of fearlessness that you have to possess to take on something like she did. If you stop to consider the ramifications, you'll never do anything. Still, it was a crazy, reckless thing to do. A million things had to go right for us to slip through the cracks the way we did for as long as we did. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to highlight this sentence in that paragraph. If you stop to consider the ramifications, you'll never do anything. Okay, I want you to comment on how this applies to you. Are you, oops, sorry. Are you a careful person or are you more reckless in your decisions? So let's apply the mother into your own life and let's see if you kind of have the same qualities she does, or are you the complete opposite? Are you more careful in your actions? All right, so again, please write a comment, and then once you're done, click comment, and then let's move on. Under apartheid, if you were a black man, you worked on a farm or in a factory or in a mine. If you were a black woman, you worked in a factory or as a maid. Those were pretty much your only options. My mother didn't want to work in a factory. She was a horrible cook and never would have stood for some lady telling her what to do all day. So, true to her nature, she found an option that was not among the ones presented to her. She took a secretarial course, a typing class. At the time, a black woman learning how to type was like a blind person learning how to drive. It's an admirable effort, but you're unlikely to ever be called upon to execute the task. By law, white-collar jobs and skilled labor jobs were reserved for whites. Black people didn't work in offices. My mom, however, was a rebel, and fortunately for her, her rebellion came along at the right moment. In the early 1980s, the South African government began making minor reforms in an attempt to quell international protests over the atrocities and human rights abuses of apartheid. Among those reforms was the token hiring of black workers in low-level white-collar jobs, like typists. Through an employment agency, she got a job as a secretary at ICI, a multinational pharmaceutical company in Braamfontein, a suburb of Johannesburg. While my mom started working, she still lived with my grandmother in Soweto, the township where the government had relocated my family decades before. But my mother was unhappy at home, and when she was 22, she ran away to live in downtown Johannesburg. There was only one problem. It was illegal for black people to live there. Okay, so I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to highlight this sentence because I think this sentence is interesting. And I'm going to write a comment here, and I'd like you to answer this in your own and in your own document. But I'm going to say that mom is tough, and I want you to think of somebody that embodies her. So think of someone in your own life who is similar to Trevor Noah's mom. Again, a 2 to 3 sentence comment, and then once you're done with your 2 to 3 sentences, you're just going to write a quick comment and then post comment. Okay, I'm going to keep reading. The ultimate goal of apartheid was to make South Africa a white country, with every black person stripped of his or her citizenship and relocated to live in the homelands. But this so-called white country could not function without black labor to produce its wealth, which meant black people had to be allowed to live near white areas in townships. Government planned ghettos built to house black workers, like Soweto. The township was where you lived, but your status as a laborer was the only thing that permitted you to stay there. If your papers were revoked for any reason, you could be deported back to the homelands. To leave the township for work in the city or for any other reason, you had to carry a pass with your ID number. Otherwise, you could be arrested. There was also a curfew. After a certain hour, blacks had to be back home in their township or risk arrest. My mother didn't care. She was determined to never go home again. So she stayed in town, hiding and sleeping in public restrooms until she learned the rules of navigating the city from the other black women who had contrived to live there. Prostitutes. Many of the prostitutes in town were Xhosa. They spoke my mother's language and showed her how to survive. They taught her how to dress up in a pair of maid's overalls to move around the city without being questioned. They also introduced her to white men who were willing to rent out flats in town. A lot of these men were foreigners, Germans and Portuguese who didn't care about the law and were happy to sign a lease giving a prostitute a place to live and work in exchange for a little bit of money. My mom wasn't interested in any such arrangement, but thanks to her job, she did have money to pay rent. She met a German fellow through one of her prostitute friends, and he agreed to let her a flat in his name. She moved in and bought a bunch of maid's overalls to wear. She was caught and arrested many times for not having her ID on the way home from work, for being in a white area after hours. The penalty for violating the pass laws was 30 days in jail or a fine of 50 rand, nearly half her monthly salary. She would scrape together the money, pay the fine, and go right back about her business. All right, at this point, I'm gonna let you guys read the rest on your own. Um, I'm gonna have you identify 3 things that strike out at you, and I want you to comment on those 3 statements or 3 phrases, or it could be just a word, but something that grabs your attention. I'd like you to write a comment next to that phrase, or next to that sentence, or next to that word. So, for example, let's say this sentence strikes out at you for some reason. You're just gonna highlight that. Um, Add a comment, and then tell me why that phrase or that sentence strikes out at you. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. Make sure you get this done by tonight.